ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. If Saddam Hussein is going to get his forces out of Kuwait before the UN deadline for doing so, he has a lot to accomplish in very little time. There is not the slightest indication that he intends to leave. There are 3 new peace initiatives underway, one by France, one by Algeria, and one by Yemen. But the United Nations Secretary General, just back from Baghdad, says he's not optimistic. And so the White House says to Iraq, any moment after midnight tomorrow is borrowed time. We begin at the White House tonight with ABC's Britt Hume.
An atmosphere described as somber anxiety settled over the White House today as the president received members of Congress and other visitors to discuss the Gulf crisis.
Photo opportunity at which I don't take questions.
The president made no public comment on the situation today, though the tension was relieved for a moment in the Oval Office as Mr. Bush had some public sport with a furry microphone cover.
Nice fella, nice fella.
That was during a meeting with Joseph Wilson, just recalled from his duty as the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires in Baghdad. As the exhaustion on Secretary of State Baker's face suggested during today's meetings here, the administration feels its diplomatic efforts are concluded, though Press Secretary Fitzwater was careful not to discourage those of other countries. We welcome anyone's efforts to achieve peace, he said. Every day that passes is a day for Saddam Hussein to choose peace over war. But he added, quote, any moment after the 15th is borrowed time. This evening, congressional leaders reported no change in the president's attitude toward the Iraqi leader.
He hasn't changed his view that force may well have to be used if he has not withdrawn by the deadline.
He's still hopeful that we can have some peaceful resolution. We haven't resigned anything. There's still plenty of time, and all it takes is a signal from Saddam Hussein.
Of course, all the signs from Saddam Hussein have so far pointed in the wrong direction. While hope has not died here for a sudden reversal in Baghdad, with only a day left and not a soldier moved, that hope is fast fading. Britt Hume, ABC News, the White House.
Is pretty much the prevailing mood. On this day before the deadline, Saddam Hussein has written a letter to King Fahd of Saudi Arabia. In it, Hussein asks, who gave you the authority to push the world to war? Hussein warns that hundreds of thousands of Saudis would die, but he says that King Fahd could stop it all by ordering all foreign troops to leave Saudi Arabia now. Over the weekend, there was some speculation that at a meeting of Iraq's National Assembly this morning, there might be a hint of compromise. There was not. ABC's Gary Shepard is in Baghdad.
It was Iraq's version of congressional authorization to use force, only in this case, the vote was unanimous. The rubber-stamped National Assembly meeting in emergency session, declaring its full and complete support of Saddam Hussein and his refusal to pull out of Kuwait. The 250 delegates chanted, with our spirit, with our blood, we are with you, Saddam. They called this a historic moment and said Iraq is ready to accept America's challenge.
We will never succumb to these threats, and we are ready for a showdown.
Hussein did not appear at the National Assembly session, but he did appear on television. Tonight, on the government's evening news broadcast, he was shown presiding at a meeting of his top military commanders. As the deadline approached, there was a noticeable increase in uniformed military travelers here in the capital and a backup of civilians trying to leave the city but unable to find rides.
The Iraqi government has declared tomorrow a day of challenge. An official spokesman says thousands will march in the streets in several cities to demonstrate their support for Saddam Hussein. Gary Shepard, ABC News, Baghdad.
When the United Nations Secretary General Javier Pérez de Cuéllar was in Baghdad, he spent 2.5 hours with Saddam Hussein yesterday. He came away empty-handed and openly pessimistic about the chances for peace. ABC's David Ensor flew back to New York with him, and he joins us now. David, was there absolutely nothing in the message from Saddam Hussein to Pérez de Cuéllar? Absolutely nothing?
That's right, Peter. There was basically, according to Pérez de Cuéllar, no hope offered. The subject of withdrawal of troops, Saddam Hussein never even mentioned the word withdrawal. And when Pérez de Cuéllar said it was a precondition for anything else, Saddam Hussein did not react to that idea. As Pérez de Cuéllar put it, he invited me, but he didn't seem interested in what I had to say, and he had nothing to offer me. Pérez de Cuéllar says it was not a conversation or a dialogue, it was 2 monologues.
Did Mr. de Cuéllar tell you on your trip back what his impressions were of Hussein?
He said that the most incredible and chilling aspect of the meeting from his point of view was the absolute serenity that Saddam Hussein seems to have, despite the forces arrayed against him and the carnage that may be about to begin. He seemed in a good mood, ever the genial host. Secretary General, would you like some more tea, perhaps some more coffee? He was ever the genial host, despite what may happen, and he seemed not to have a care in the world. Yet he did seem to the Secretary General to be both sane, he said, and intelligent.
So the characterization from the Secretary General is no hope as far as he's concerned.
I have never heard him so pessimistic before, and I said that to him, and he said, that's right, and that's because I am deeply pessimistic. He'll be making a report to that effect later tonight.
Okay, David Ensor at the United Nations, thank you very much. Our national security correspondent, John McQueffey, is standing by at the State Department now, and he can talk to us about the Secretary of State's attitude today. Does the Secretary of State consider it's all over, Jack?
He doesn't consider it all over, Peter. He is trying to repeatedly say in public that he believes various peace initiatives should still be tried at this very late hour, but certainly with only such a small amount of time remaining, I don't think anyone in the Bush administration believes Saddam Hussein is going to change his mind.
Jack, the Secretary of State returned today from Washington from a very long trip, which started off, it seemed like a negotiating trip, but ended up like a war trip. Did he, in fact, on that trip, brief everybody about the precise nature of going to war now?
Well, not down to the minute and the hour, Peter, but it is very clear that he laid out to the coalition members what it is that George Bush intends to do over the course of the weeks ahead. He also tried to define exactly how each country is going to participate in this and get the leaders, get the foreign ministers to tell him again and again where their country is going to stand when and if a war starts. Jim Baker, as you know, is a lawyer and a very careful political tactician. He does not like to leave any detail to uncertainty, and indeed on this one he feels, I believe, that he has created a very solid coalition going into this
One question,
deadline.
John, about Turkey. The Turks today asked for more American aircraft to come. Is Turkey going to be used by the American Air Force to attack Iraq if war breaks out?
The Turks have certainly said in public that they are not going to allow that, not at this point anyway. There are some people in the Bush administration that hope that once a war starts, if a war does start, that in fact the U.S. will be able to use those bases. But at this point, the extra aircraft are there to protect Turkey, and the extra aircraft are there to reinforce the forces that are in Saudi Arabia to be flown from Saudi Arabia, not Turkey.
Okay, John McQueffey at the State Department, thank you very much. Most Americans think that Congress did the right thing when it voted over the weekend to give President Bush the authority he sought to go to war. Our polling unit took a new survey last night, and 76% of the people they spoke to approved of Congress's action. The only dispute was in the timing. 44% Congress said Congress should have voted sooner. Overall, support for Mr. Bush's handling of the crisis remains high. 68% of Americans support his policies. 86% believe there will be war. When we come back, American pilots in the Gulf, they say they're ready.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by Jeep Eagle.
There are now about 400,000 American troops on duty in the Gulf, and it is already early in the morning of January the 15th there. The public message which U.S. commanders are sending is of their readiness to fight. That includes the pilots who will be the first to experience combat. If it happens, ABC's Bill Rediker is in Saudi Arabia.
The Army's best-equipped armor units are still arriving here, too late to be on the front line by the deadline. Also on the way, 18 amphibious ships with about 10,000 Marines, and another 3 aircraft carrier battle groups, 2 of which pass through the Suez Canal today. Still, military planners say they are ready because of the U.S. advantage in the air. With the Air Force expected to strike the first blows, pilots say they've been going over battle plans and getting mentally prepared to go to war. The word to strike could now come in hours. It creates a new kind of pressure.
Ever since we've had this 15 January deadline, line drawn in the sand, whatever you want to call it, our edge has been building as we get closer and closer to that date.
6115. American reconnaissance planes have pinpointed targets in Iraq and Kuwait. The coordinates have been loaded into aircraft computers. But pilots say in the heat of battle, they will also rely on instinct.
Primarily, you fall back on habit patterns. when you're flying something like you referred to that fast, when engagements happen that quickly, there's not time to, look down at a checklist or refer to a book.
Most Air Force pilots have never flown in combat, never faced this kind of threat before.
If you haven't been shot at, if you haven't been in air combat before, then you never know exactly what it's going to be like.
For America's pilots, the war of nerves has begun. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Saudi Arabia.
Much of America's air power in the region is in Saudi Arabia or on aircraft carriers in or outside the Gulf for the main. America is also using air bases in other Gulf countries, although it does not say much about them, lest those countries be embarrassed. Today, U.S. military officials did allow reporters into a base that is outside of Saudi Arabia, obviously to demonstrate the extent of U.S. air power. Here's ABC's Jim Hickey.
Until now, this airbase in the Persian Gulf has been a secret. Still being fortified, it will be a key staging point if war begins. Hundreds of U.S. Air Force and Marine pilots stand prepared to launch an assault. It is no coincidence that the veil on this previously unpublicized airbase is being lifted now. More American muscle flexing as the time for possible war grows short. These Marine jets may be among the first to take off. Their mission is to jam Iraqi radar. At the same time, these Air Force F-4s will go after Saddam Hussein's air defenses.
Our job is to go in there ahead of the fighters, ahead of the other supporting airplanes, and knock out those anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles and the surveillance radars.
The Marines and airmen here know the clock is ticking. They can feel it.
We see the tension building up, even the past couple of days. It's gotten more so.
All these gas drills, everybody wonders, is this it or is this just a drill? It's getting pretty high stress around here.
They are trying to relieve the tension the best they can. With peace a fading prospect now, they simply want to get on with the job. Jim Hickey, ABC News, in the Persian Gulf.
It is pretty common knowledge now that America's air power is far superior to that of Iraq. Gaining control over Iraq and Kuwaiti airspace quickly is a critical element of the U.S. battle plan, and we asked our Pentagon correspondent Bob Zelnick to review precisely how the U.S. would try to achieve that goal.
Tomahawk cruise missiles like these could be among the first weapons launched against Iraq. Navy sources say the U.S. has about 500 of the missiles aboard surface ships and submarines in the Gulf area. They would be launched against Iraqi command centers, air bases, fuel depots, and chemical weapons facilities. The U.S. also has about 1,300 aircraft committed to the Gulf, including more than 400 based aboard carriers. Iraq has about 700 combat aircraft, few considered equal to U.S. planes in performance, firepower, or pilot skills. Just as in the 1986 raid on Libya, the key early mission for U.S. aircraft will be to destroy Iraqi planes and surface-to-air missile batteries. In anticipation of U.S. attack, intelligence sources say the Iraqis have dispersed their aircraft among some 60 bases and have set up mobile command facilities that can be moved quickly among bunkers fortified by concrete. Only after the U.S. has achieved command of the skies would B-52 and FB-111 bombers begin to hit entrenched Iraqi ground forces. There are many challenges. For strikes deep into Iraq, aerial refueling will be required. Some new U.S. systems, like the stealth fighter, have never been tested against modern air defenses. Older aircraft, like the B-52, now rely on new electronic countermeasures to foil anti-aircraft weapons that proved so damaging in Vietnam. Privately, Air Force officials estimate that if the war lasts a month, U.S. warplanes will fly a total of 30,000 individual missions. Experience suggests that could mean the loss of 150 aircraft, with a third of the crews killed, a third captured, and a third rescued. Bob Zelnick, ABC News at the Pentagon.
One other note from the